My name is Isla, and at 34 years old, I never imagined I'd be sitting at my parents' Thanksgiving table watching my mother tear up with pride as she announced my sister Emma's new home purchase. For 5 years, I'd kept my real life hidden from my family, playing the role of the struggling artist, while my bank account told a very different story. As I sat there, my designer handbag held keys to a $980,000 waterfront condo that would soon silence the entire room. Before I share what happened next, where are you joining me from today? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, what unfolds will change how you view family dynamics forever. Growing up as the younger daughter in the Harrison family meant living in Emma's shadow from day one. She was everything our parents dreamed of in a child. Straight A, student varsity cheerleader homecoming queen, and later valedictorian of her high school class. Every report card she brought home earned a spot on the refrigerator. Every trophy she won got its own shelf in the living room. Every achievement was documented in photo albums my mother would proudly show anyone who visited. I was different. Where Emma excelled in traditional academics, I lost myself in art and design. While she was solving calculus problems, I was sketching architectural concepts in my notebooks. When she gave speeches at student council meetings, I was creating digital art on the old computer in my bedroom. My parents never said it outright, but their message was clear. Emma was the success story. I was the dreamer who needed to get her head out of the clouds. The difference in how we were treated started early. When Emma wanted to join the expensive traveling soccer team in middle school, our parents didn't hesitate. They drove her to practices 3 towns over, paid for hotels during tournaments, and cheered at every game. When I asked to attend a summer art program at the local college, they told me we couldn't afford it and suggested I get a part-time job instead. I was 14. College brought the divide into sharper focus. Emma announced she'd been accepted to the State University's business program, and our parents threw her a party. They invited relatives from 3 states away. Mom baked a cake shaped like the university logo. Dad gave a speech about how proud he was of his firstborn. They paid her full tuition without question, even taking out a second mortgage to ensure she wouldn't need student loans. When I got accepted to the Pacific Northwest College of Art and Design with a partial scholarship, the reaction was different. Mom's first words were, "Art school. How are you going to make a living with that?" Dad just shook his head and muttered something about wasting potential. They refused to co-sign my student loans, saying they couldn't support what they called a hobby degree. I remember sitting in my room that night, acceptance letter in hand, wondering if maybe they were right about me. But I went anyway. I worked 3 jobs to cover what my scholarship didn't. I served coffee at 5 in the morning before classes. I stocked shelves at Target in the evenings. On weekends, I cleaned offices. My hands were constantly stained with either espresso or cleaning chemicals. Meanwhile, Emma was joining her sorority, studying abroad in London, and interning at prestigious companies, all funded by our parents. After graduation, the comparisons intensified. Emma landed a job at a marketing firm in Portland, starting at $65,000 a year. She met Todd at a company mixer 6 months later. He was a junior associate at a law firm, everything our parents considered suitable. Clean-cut, stable job came from what Mom called good stock, which meant his father was a doctor and his mother was a teacher. They dated for exactly 2 years before he proposed with a 2-carat diamond at a restaurant our parents couldn't afford, but pretended they could. Their wedding was everything traditional: country club venue, 200 guests, Emma in a princess ball gown that cost more than I made in 3 months. I was the maid of honor standing there in a lavender dress Mom picked because it would help hide your figure, watching my parents beam with pride. During his toast, Dad said, "We always knew Emma would make us proud, and today she's exceeded every expectation." He looked right at me when he said it, though I don't think he realized. I moved to Seattle 2 weeks after the wedding. I had $500 in my bank account, a used Honda Civic with 150,000 miles on it, and a freelance contract that would pay me $2,000 to redesign a local restaurant's website. My parents called it running away from reality. Mom actually used the words Peter Pan syndrome when she told her friends why I was leaving. "Isla just can't seem to grow up and settle down like Emma," became her standard explanation. Those first months in Seattle were brutal but liberating. I lived in a studio apartment so small I could touch both walls if I stretched my arms out. I ate ramen 5 nights a week. I took every freelance project I could find, no matter how small the pay. Logo designs for $50, website mockups for $100, business cards for $25. I was building something, though nobody in my family could see it. The family group chat became my daily reminder of where I stood. Emma would post photos of her new promotions, their house hunting journey ultrasound images when she got pregnant. Mom would respond with hearts and praise emojis. Dad would write things like, "That's my girl," or "making us proud." When I shared that I'd landed my first tech startup client, Mom responded with a single thumbs up. When I posted about completing a major project, nobody responded at all. I learned to stop sharing. Family dinners became performances where I'd nod along as Mom updated everyone on Emma's achievements. She just got promoted to senior marketing manager, can you believe it? And Todd made partner at his firm. They're looking at houses in the best school district. Then she'd turn to me with that pitying look. And Isla's still doing her computer drawings. Maybe someday you'll find something stable. The phrase that hurt most was one Mom repeated often. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" She'd say it when I showed up to family events in jeans instead of dresses. She'd say it when I mentioned working on weekends. She'd say it when I was 28 and still single. She'd say it casually, like it was helpful advice instead of a knife to my self-worth. Dad's silence was almost worse. He never defended me, never suggested that maybe there were different paths to success. He'd just sit there reading his newspaper or checking his phone, acting like he didn't hear Mom's constant comparisons. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with something like disappointment, as if he was wondering where he'd gone wrong with his second daughter. Family gatherings became torture. Christmas meant listening to Emma talk about her promotion, while Mom asked me if I'd thought about getting a real job. Birthdays meant watching Emma receive expensive gifts while I got practical things like grocery store gift cards because Mom worried I wasn't eating enough. 4th of July meant Emma and Todd hosting at their first house, a 3-bedroom in the suburbs, while everyone carefully avoided asking where I was living. The breaking point came 3 years after I moved to Seattle. It was Thanksgiving, and I'd just signed my biggest client yet, a Fortune 500 company that needed a complete digital transformation of their user experience. The contract was worth $300,000. I was so excited I could barely contain it during the drive to Portland. This was it, I thought. This would finally show them I'd made it. I waited for the right moment during dinner. Emma had just finished talking about their plans to try for a second baby. Mom was glowing with pride. I cleared my throat and said, "I have some news too. I just landed a major contract with a Fortune 500 company." Mom barely looked up from her plate. "That's nice, dear. Is it enough to finally get you a proper apartment?" Emma laughed and said, "Isla and her little projects. Remember when you used to make those drawings and say you'd be famous?" Todd smirked. Dad just kept eating. That was the night I decided to stop trying to earn their approval. I drove back to Seattle in tears, but by the time I reached my apartment, those tears had transformed into determination. If they couldn't see my worth, I'd build an empire they couldn't ignore. And when the time was right, I'd show them exactly what they'd been dismissing all these years. The morning after that devastating Thanksgiving, I woke up with absolute clarity. If my family would never see me as successful, I'd become so successful, they'd have no choice but to acknowledge it. But I wouldn't tell them, not yet, maybe not ever. This success would be mine alone, built without their support or validation. I threw myself into work with an intensity I'd never had before. That Fortune 500 contract became my launching pad. I delivered the project 2 weeks early, and the results exceeded every metric they'd hoped for. User engagement increased by 300%. Sales conversions jumped 45%. The CEO personally called to thank me and asked if I'd be interested in ongoing work. Word spread quickly in Seattle's tech scene. Startups began reaching out, desperate for the kind of transformation I delivered. Within 6 months, I had more work than I could handle alone. I hired my first contractor, then another, then another. By the end of my first year running what was becoming a real agency, I was managing 8 freelancers and had crossed 400,000 in revenue. But here's the thing about success: when you've been dismissed your whole life, you learn to hide it. When Mom called to ask how I was doing, I'd say fine, just working on some projects. When Emma posted about her new title as marketing director, I'd like the post and stay quiet about landing Amazon as a client. When Dad finally asked if I needed money, I said I was managing, not mentioning the 50,000 sitting in my business checking account. The secrecy became addictive. Every family gathering where they pitied me while I knew the truth felt like a small victory. I'd sit at their table eating mom's dry turkey, wearing my old college sweatshirt, listening to them worry about my future, all while knowing I'd made more that month than Emma made all year. It was my secret rebellion, my private revolution. 2 years into building my agency, I made my first million in revenue. I celebrated alone in my studio apartment with a bottle of champagne, then went online and looked at real estate. Not because I needed to move, but because I could. That's when I saw it, the waterfront condo in downtown Seattle. 32nd floor floor-to-ceiling windows, views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. The price tag read $980,000. Most people would have called their parents, shared the excitement of even looking at such a property. I scheduled a viewing for the next day. The real estate agent, a polished woman named Catherine, looked at my Honda Civic and my jeans and almost canceled on the spot. Then I mentioned I'd be paying cash. Her entire demeanor shifted. Walking into that penthouse felt like stepping into the life I was meant to have. The morning light flooded through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The kitchen was a chef's dream with appliances I'd only seen in magazines. The primary suite had a bathroom bigger than my current apartment, but it was the view that sold me. Standing on that balcony, looking out at the water, I could see my entire journey from the girl whose parents didn't believe in her to the woman who'd built something extraordinary entirely on her own. I closed on the condo 45 days later. Cash payment, no contingencies. The title company seemed shocked when I transferred the full amount from my business account. I hired an interior designer, someone I'd worked with on a project, and gave her free rein. Make it stunning, I said. The kind of place that leaves people speechless. While my new home was being perfected, I kept growing the business. Microsoft reached out about a massive project, then Google, then Adobe. I incorporated, officially hired full-time employees, and moved into a proper office space in South Lake Union. My team grew to 12 people. We were turning down clients because we couldn't handle the volume. I started investing the profits. First, a $400,000 townhouse in Queen Anne that I turned into an Airbnb. It booked solid within the first week. Then a $650,000 rental property in Capitol Hill, a trendy neighborhood where young professionals paid premium rent. The monthly income from those properties alone exceeded what Emma made annually. My investment portfolio grew beyond real estate. Tech stocks, index funds, a stake in 2 startups I believed in. My financial advisor, who I'd hired when my net worth hit $2 million, kept pushing me to diversify more. "You're doing incredibly well for someone your age," he said during one meeting. "Most people don't reach this level until their 50s, if ever." Yet every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering, I showed up in my old Honda, wearing simple clothes from Target, playing the role of struggling artist. Mom would slip me $100 bills for groceries, and I'd take them knowing I had more in my checking account than my parents' entire retirement fund. Emma would offer me her old clothes, and I'd accept them graciously, then donate them on the drive home. The elaborate deception required careful management. I had 2 Instagram accounts, one for family showing my simple life, another for my professional network showcasing my real world. When clients wanted to feature me in success stories, I always declined. When Forbes reached out about including me in their 30 under 30 list, I politely refused. My success was mine to know and mine to reveal when I chose. Sometimes the weight of the secret felt overwhelming. I'd be sitting at a family dinner listening to Mom praise Emma for buying a new car, while knowing I could buy 10 of those cars without blinking. Or Dad would lecture me about financial responsibility, while I literally had a meeting with my wealth management team scheduled for the next day. But the secret also felt like armor protecting me from their judgment and dismissal. My friends in Seattle knew the truth, of course. They'd visit my penthouse and joke about my double life. My boyfriend Marcus, a software engineer I'd met at a tech conference, found the whole situation bizarre. "Why don't you just tell them?" he'd ask. "They're your family. They should be proud of you." But he didn't understand what it was like to spend your entire life being compared and found wanting. He didn't know how it felt to achieve something amazing, only to have it dismissed as a little project. He didn't carry the weight of decades of being asked why you couldn't be more like your sister. The secret wasn't about revenge or spite. It was about self-preservation. 3 years into running my agency, we hit 2.8 million in annual revenue. I promoted my best designer to creative director, my operations manager to COO, and stepped back from day-to-day operations. I wanted to focus on strategy and growth, maybe acquire another agency or expand into new markets. I was 32 years old and essentially semi-retired, though my family thought I was barely scraping by. The distance between my real life and the life my family imagined grew wider every day. Emma would text me about sales at discount stores, thinking she was helping her struggling sister. Mom would send me job listings for entry-level marketing positions, just in case you want something steady. Dad would forward articles about the importance of retirement planning, not knowing I'd already set aside more than he'd ever earned. I thought about telling them so many times. When Emma complained about not being able to afford a vacation while I'd just returned from 2 weeks in Bali. When Mom cried about not having money for a new roof while I could have written a check without thinking twice. When Dad mentioned working until 70 because their retirement wasn't enough, while I could have retired at 30 if I'd wanted. But each time I remembered all the moments they'd chosen Emma over me, all the times they'd dismissed my dreams as unrealistic, all the family gatherings where my achievements were footnotes to Emma's headlines. And I'd keep my mouth shut, holding my secret close like a winning lottery ticket I hadn't decided to cash. The funny thing about massive success is that it changes you in ways you don't expect. I became more confident, but also more private, more generous with strangers, but more cautious with family, more aware of my worth, but also more protective of it. The money was nice, but the knowledge that I'd built something extraordinary without anyone's help or approval, that was priceless. I knew eventually the truth would come out. Secrets this big don't stay hidden forever. But I wanted to control when and how it happened. I wanted the revelation to be on my terms, in my timing, in a way that would make them understand not just what I'd achieved, but what their doubt had cost them in terms of really knowing me. That Thanksgiving started like every other family gathering at my parents' house in suburban Portland. I pulled up in my Honda Civic at exactly 2 in the afternoon, parking behind Emma's new Lexus SUV and Todd's BMW. The contrast between our vehicles would have been laughable if it wasn't so deliberately misleading on my part. I grabbed the pie I'd bought from Safeway, knowing Mom would comment that Emma had made hers from scratch, and walked to the front door. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing, the same scent that had marked every Thanksgiving of my childhood. Emma's kids, 6-year-old Madison and 4-year-old Ethan, ran to hug me at the door. They were the only family members who saw me without judgment, and I loved them fiercely for it. Emma appeared behind them wearing a perfect autumn dress that probably came from Nordstrom, her hair in an elaborate braid that screamed, "I have my life together." "Isla," she said with that bright smile that never quite reached her eyes when directed at me, "you made it. We were worried you might have to work. You know how those freelance things can be unpredictable." There it was, the first dig disguised as concern delivered within 30 seconds of my arrival. Mom emerged from the kitchen apron covered in flour, looking every bit the matriarch she loved playing. "Oh, good you're here. Emma and I have been cooking since 6 this morning. Did you bring something?" She looked at my store-bought pie with barely concealed disappointment. "How thoughtful. We'll put it out with the desserts, though we probably have more than enough already." I hugged her, smelling the same perfume she'd worn since I was 5, and wondered what she'd say if she knew I'd spent the morning reviewing a proposal to acquire a competing agency for $1.5 million. "Thanks for having me, Mom. The house looks great." Dad was in his usual chair watching football with Todd. They both looked up when I entered, offering the kind of acknowledgement you'd give a delivery person. Todd stood to shake my hand with that lawyer grip he'd perfected, the one that said he was successful and wanted everyone to know it. "Isla, good to see you. Still doing the graphic design thing?" "Something like that," I replied, accepting a beer from Dad even though I preferred wine. It was easier to play along with their assumptions than correct them. I settled into the corner of the couch, the same spot I'd occupied at every family gathering since childhood, and prepared for the annual performance. Aunt Martha arrived next with her husband Jim and their son Christopher, who'd just made junior partner at his accounting firm. Then came Mom's sister Beth with her new boyfriend, a dentist named Richard, who couldn't stop mentioning his practice's success. The living room filled with the usual suspects, all ready to play their roles in our family's hierarchy of achievement. The pre-dinner conversation followed its predictable pattern. Christopher talked about his promotion, while his mother beamed. Richard discussed his plans to open a second practice. Todd mentioned a case he'd won that got coverage in the local paper. And through it all, Emma sat at the center, like the sun everyone orbited around, adding perfectly timed comments that showed she belonged in this world of traditional success. "Emma has the most wonderful news," Mom announced, unable to contain herself any longer. "But I'll let her share it herself." She looked at Emma with such pride that it made my chest ache, not from jealousy anymore, but from the familiar reminder that I'd never inspire that look. Emma stood up, smoothing her dress, and smiled at the room. "Well, we weren't going to say anything yet, but we've finally done it. We bought our dream home." The room erupted in congratulations. Mom actually started crying. Dad got up to hug Emma, something he rarely did with anyone. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and the most amazing kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Emma continued, pulling out her phone. "It's in Laurelhurst, you know, that neighborhood with the excellent schools and the community pool. 450,000, but Todd says it's a great investment." Everyone gathered around her phone, making appreciative noises as she swiped through photos. The house was nice, typical suburban Portland with a 2-car garage and a decent yard. It was exactly the kind of place our parents had dreamed their daughters would live in, safe, respectable, and firmly middle class. "The schools are rated 9 out of 10, Todd added, putting his arm around Emma. "Madison will be able to walk to elementary school, and there's a golf course just 5 minutes away." He said this looking at Dad, who'd always wanted to belong to a golf club, but could never afford it. Mom clasped her hands together like she was praying. "Both my girls are finally settled. Emma with her beautiful family and new house." She paused and looked at me with that familiar expression of sympathetic concern. "And Isla, well, you're doing your best with your art things. That's what matters." "Are you still in that studio apartment?" Aunt Martha asked, her voice dripping with pity. "The one above the Thai restaurant that must be so noisy." I hadn't lived there in 3 years, but I'd never corrected their assumption. "Actually, I moved a while ago," I said casually, taking a sip of beer. "Oh, that's wonderful," Mom exclaimed. "Did you find a nice 1 bedroom? I know how expensive Seattle can be. Even small places cost a fortune these days." Emma laughed, not meanly, but with that older sister condescension I knew so well. "Isla probably found some artist commune or something. You know how she likes those alternative living situations. Remember in college when she wanted to live in that converted warehouse?" "It's important to live within your means," Dad added, finally contributing to the conversation. "Too many young people get in over their heads with rent they can't afford. Better to have a modest place you can manage than stretch yourself too thin." Christopher's mother nodded sagely. "My Christopher always says the same thing. He lived in a simple apartment for years before buying his condo. That's how you build wealth, through patience and smart choices." I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. A text from my property manager flashed on the screen. "November rent from all properties deposited $18,500. The Airbnb is booked solid through New Year's." I locked the screen and looked around the room at my family, all of them so certain they understood my life. "So where are you living now, Isla?" Emma asked, settling back into her spot at the center of attention. "Still in Capitol Hill with all the hipsters." The moment felt different somehow. Maybe it was the years of accumulated dismissals. Maybe it was Emma's casual assumption that I lived among hipsters. Maybe it was Mom's tears of pride for Emma's suburban house, while she'd never once asked about my actual living situation. Or maybe it was just time. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "would you like to see my place?" The question landed with the weight of politeness. Of course they'd say yes, expecting to see some quirky apartment with exposed brick and houseplants, the kind of place struggling artists lived in movies. Emma smiled indulgently. "Of course I love seeing how creative people make small spaces work." Mom settled her reading glasses on her nose. "That's nice, dear. Is it rent-controlled? I know that's important in expensive cities." I pulled up the photos I'd been saving for 3 years, the ones from the real estate listing that I'd never shared with anyone in this room. My finger hovered over the first one for just a second, savoring this last moment of their assumptions. Then I turned the phone toward them. The first photo showed the building's exterior, a gleaming tower of glass and steel rising above Elliott Bay. The architecture was unmistakably luxury, the kind of building that gets featured in magazines. Emma leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "That's a beautiful building," she said carefully. "Which floor are you on?" "The penthouse," I replied simply. "Well, technically one of the penthouses. There are three." The room went quiet except for the football game Dad had forgotten to mute. Todd cleared his throat. "You're renting a penthouse?" "No," I said, swiping to the next photo. "I bought it 2 years ago." The living room photo filled my phone screen. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a view that stretched from the Space Needle to Mount Rainier. Italian leather furniture sat on polished hardwood floors. A chandelier that cost more than most people's cars hung from the vaulted ceiling. The silence in my parents' living room became suffocating. "That's not possible," Emma said flatly. "This is some kind of joke. You do freelance design. You drive a Honda Civic that's older than Madison." I kept swiping. The chef's kitchen with its wolf range and sub-zero refrigerator. The primary bedroom with its private balcony overlooking the water. The bathroom with its soaking tub positioned to watch sunsets over the Olympics. The home office where I'd built an empire while they thought I was struggling. Mom's face had gone pale. She reached for Dad's hand, something she only did when she was truly shaken. "I don't understand. Is this some kind of staging project you're working on?" "No, Mom, this is my home. Has been for 2 years." I swiped to a photo of me on the balcony one Marcus had taken during a dinner party. I was holding champagne, laughing, the city lights sparkling behind me. It was the me they'd never met, confident, successful, and completely at peace with who I was. Aunt Martha's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on Mom's hardwood floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. Christopher had stopped mid-chew, a piece of cheese hanging from his mouth. Richard the dentist was opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. "How much?" Dad's voice came out as a whisper. In 34 years, I'd never heard him whisper. 980,000, I said, maintaining the same tone I'd used to discuss the weather. I paid cash. The shattered wine glass sat forgotten on the floor, red wine seeping into Mom's precious Persian rug. As 13 pairs of eyes stared at me in complete disbelief, Emma's face had gone from pale to red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to form words. Todd stood frozen with his beer halfway to his lips. Mom gripped Dad's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "Cash." Todd finally managed his lawyer brain, trying to process the impossibility of what I'd just said. "You paid $980,000 in cash. That's nearly $1 million. "I'm aware of the amount," I said calmly, watching their world restructure itself in real time. Years of assumptions and pity were crashing against the reality I just presented, and the collision was spectacular. Emma found her voice first, and it came out sharp with accusation. "This is impossible. You do freelance art, you make logos for restaurants. You told us you were barely getting by." Her voice rose with each sentence, the perfect composure she always maintained, cracking like ice under pressure. "I never said I was barely getting by," I corrected gently. "You all assume that. I simply didn't correct you." Mom released Dad's hand and stood up, her legs visibly shaking. "But how? We offered you money. I gave you grocery gift cards. Your father and I worried about you constantly. How could you have that kind of money?" "I own a design agency," I said, finally speaking the words I'd held back for 5 years. "We specialize in user experience and digital transformation for major corporations." "What kind of corporations?" Richard the dentist asked, apparently finding his professional curiosity despite the shock. "Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Adobe." I listed them casually like items on a grocery list. "We just signed a contract with Apple for their next interface redesign." Christopher actually laughed, but it was nervous disbelieving. "You're telling us you work with the biggest tech companies in the world. You—" "Not just work with," I clarified. "They seek me out. My agency has a 2-year waiting list. We turn down more clients than we accept." Emma sank into her chair, her perfect posture crumbling. "How long?" she whispered. "How long have you been lying to us?" "I never lied," I said, feeling years of suppressed frustration beginning to surface. "I told you I was working. I told you I had clients. I even tried to tell you about my successes, but you weren't interested. Remember 3 years ago when I mentioned landing a Fortune 500 client? Mom asked if it was enough to get a proper apartment. Dad just kept eating dinner. You laughed about my little projects. The memory hit them visibly. I saw recognition dawn on Mom's face, followed immediately by shame. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from hurt or humiliation. So you decided to what, make fools of us? Emma's tears spilled over, running through her carefully applied makeup. You sat here year after year letting us think you were some struggling artist while you were secretly rich. I sat here year after year being told I should be more like you. I countered, my voice steady but firm. Every family gathering, every phone call, every group text was a reminder that Emma was the success and I was the failure. Mom literally used those words, success and failure. Mom gasped. I never called you a failure. Thanksgiving 4 years ago, you introduced us to your friend from church as, quote, Emma, my successful daughter, and Isla, my creative one, who's still finding her way, unquote. Christmas that same year, you told Aunt Martha that at least you had one daughter who made you proud. Emma's birthday 2 years ago, your toast included the phrase, thank God one of my daughters turned out responsible. Each memory landed like a punch. Mom's face crumpled as she recognized her own words. Dad, who'd been silent since asking about the price, finally spoke. You should have told us, he said quietly. We're your family. Are you? The question came out before I could stop it. Because family is supposed to support each other. Family is supposed to celebrate each other's successes, not dismiss them as little projects or computer drawings. Family isn't supposed to have favorites. We didn't have favorites, Mom protested weakly, but even she didn't sound convinced. I pulled up my phone again, this time showing them my company's website. Harrison Digital Innovation, 12 full-time employees, offices in South Lake Union. Annual revenue of $2.8 million last year. Todd nearly dropped his beer. $2.8 million in revenue annually. That's just the agency. I continued, feeling a strange liberation in finally telling the truth. I also own investment properties, 2 rentals and an Airbnb that generate about $18,000 a month in passive income. Aunt Martha, who'd been silent since dropping her wine glass, finally spoke. Why didn't you tell us? Why keep it secret? Would you have believed me? I asked, looking around the room. If 3 years ago I'd announced I was a millionaire, what would you have said? You'd have thought I was delusional, or lying, or in some kind of trouble. Because in your minds, I was the failure, the one who couldn't be like Emma. Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. So this was all what revenge, some elaborate plan to humiliate me. This was never about you, Emma, I said, and realized it was true. This was about me, about building something for myself without anyone's approval or validation, about proving to myself that I could succeed even when everyone expected me to fail. We didn't expect you to fail, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dad, you forwarded me job listings for entry-level positions last month. Entry-level. I'm 34 years old, and you thought I needed help finding a job that pays $40,000 a year. My coffee maker cost more than that. The casual mention of expensive appliances seemed to break something in the room. Christopher's mother turned to Mom with barely concealed excitement. Your daughter is a millionaire. Both your daughters are successful. This is wonderful. But Mom didn't look happy. She looked devastated. All those times I worried about you. All those nights I couldn't sleep thinking you were struggling. You let me believe you were barely surviving. The same way you let me believe I'd never amount to anything, I replied. The difference is I was protecting myself. You were just disappointed in me. That's not fair, Emma interjected, wiping her tears. We're your family. We had a right to know. Did you? I challenged. What right? The same right you exercised when you announced your engagement without telling me you'd been dating Todd for 6 months. The same right you used when you told everyone I was wasting my life at art school. Where were my rights when you and Mom planned your entire wedding without asking my opinion once, even though I was maid of honor? The specific memories clearly hit home. Emma's face flushed deeper. That's different. Is it, or is it just that you're used to being the one with the good news while I'm supposed to be the one who needs help? Todd, ever the lawyer, tried to redirect. Let's focus on the positive here. Isla has built something incredible. We should be celebrating. Now you want to celebrate? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. Where was the celebration when I landed my first client? When I hired my first employee? When I signed the lease on my office? You only want to celebrate now because the number is too big to ignore. Mom sank back into her chair, looking older than I'd ever seen her. We failed you, she said quietly. Is that what you want to hear? We failed as parents. I want you to hear that you had 2 daughters, but you only saw one. I said, feeling tears threaten for the first time. I want you to understand that every time you praised Emma and dismissed me, it carved out a piece of my self-worth. I want you to know that I succeeded not because of your support, but in spite of your doubt. So what now? Emma asked, her voice small and defeated. You've made your point. You're richer than all of us. You win. Is that what you wanted? I wanted a family that believed in me, I said simply. But since I couldn't have that, I built a life where I didn't need it. The room fell silent except for the forgotten football game. The Thanksgiving dinner sat cooling in the kitchen, the turkey Mom and Emma had prepared with such pride, now seeming insignificant compared to the family dynamics unraveling in the living room. Richard the dentist cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should eat. How can you think about food right now? Aunt Martha hissed at him. Isla just revealed she's been secretly wealthy for years. Not secretly wealthy, I corrected. Secretly successful. There's a difference. The wealth is just a byproduct of building something valuable. The success is what mattered, and none of you could see it because it didn't look like Emma's traditional path. Dad stood up slowly, his movements careful, like he'd aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. Show me more, he said quietly. Show me your office, your team. Show me what you built. It was the first time in my entire life that my father had asked to see my work. I pulled up photos from our last company retreat. My team gathered on a boat we'd chartered for a Puget Sound cruise. Then our office with its modern design and views of Lake Union. The awards wall where we displayed recognition from industry organizations I knew they'd never heard of. But that meant everything in our field. That's you in the middle, Dad asked, pointing at a photo of me speaking at a conference. That was at South by Southwest last year. I gave a keynote on the future of digital design. A keynote? Mom's voice was faint, like a main speaker. The main speaker, I confirmed. They paid me $50,000 for a 45-minute talk. Todd whistled low. $50,000 for 45 minutes. It's actually on the low end for keynotes at that level, but I waived part of my fee because I believe in what they're doing with design education. The revelations kept landing like bombs in their suburban living room. Every detail I shared seemed to widen the gap between who they thought I was and who I actually am. Emma had stopped crying, but looked shell-shocked, her dreams of being the family success story evaporating in real time. I need air, she announced suddenly, heading for the back door. Emma, wait, Todd called after her, but she was already gone. He looked at me with something between awe and resentment. You know this changes everything, right? The entire family dynamic, it's all different now. It's only different if you let it be, I said. I'm still me. I still love my niece and nephew. I still show up to family gatherings. I still care about all of you, even when you made it clear you didn't care about understanding me. Mom started crying then. Not the happy tears from Emma's house announcement, but deep, grieving sobs. We lost so much time. All those years we could have been proud of you, celebrating with you. And we missed it because we were too blind to see. You saw what you wanted to see, I said gently. Emma fit the mold. You understood traditional job marriage house kids. I didn't fit, so you assumed I was failing. But you could have told us, Mom insisted through her tears. You could have made us understand. I thought about all the times I'd tried, all the dismissed achievements, the ignored messages, the changed subjects when I brought up my work. I tried, Mom, but you had already decided who I was, the struggling artist daughter who couldn't be like her successful sister. It became easier to let you believe it than to keep fighting for your approval. Christopher's mother, ever the social climber, suddenly perked up. You know, my Christopher is single. Maybe you two should get coffee sometime. The absurdity of her trying to matchmake in the middle of this family crisis broke the tension slightly. Christopher looked mortified. Mom, please. What I'm just saying, two successful young people in similar fields. I have a boyfriend, I said, realizing I'd never mentioned Marcus to most of them. We've been together 2 years. Another bomb. Another way I'd kept my life separate from them. Mom looked stricken. 2 years? You've been with someone for 2 years and we didn't know. You never asked about my personal life, unless it was to wonder when I'd settle down like Emma. What does he do? Dad asked, apparently trying to grasp onto normal conversation threads. He's a software engineer at Microsoft. We met at a conference where I was speaking. Microsoft, Todd repeated, like saying it might make all of this more real. Of course. Emma came back inside, her face blotchy from crying. I need to know something, she said, looking directly at me. Did you enjoy it? Watching us pity you while you knew the truth, did it make you happy? I considered the question honestly. No, it made me sad. Every single time it made me sad. But it also protected me from having to watch you all suddenly care about me because of money, instead of caring about me as a person. That's not fair, Emma protested. You never gave us the chance to care about your success. You had plenty of chances to care about my struggles. Where were you when I was working 3 jobs in college? When I was starting out in Seattle, scared and alone? When I was building my company from nothing? You only want to care now because the success is too big to ignore. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Emma stood in the doorway, her perfect composure completely shattered, while Mom's tears had shifted from shock to something deeper, a recognition of loss that couldn't be undone. The extended family watched like an audience at a play they couldn't look away from, even though they desperately wanted to. Dad was the one who broke the silence, his voice carrying an authority I rarely heard from him. Everyone sit down, he said. We're going to talk about this properly. It wasn't a request. Even Todd, who usually positioned himself as the alpha male at family gatherings, quickly found a seat. Emma reluctantly returned to her chair, though she couldn't look at me. The cousins and aunts settled nervously, unsure if they should even be present for what was about to unfold. Isla, Dad started, then stopped, running his hand through his thinning hair. I need you to understand something. Your mother and I, we come from a different generation. We understood Emma's path because it was our path. College, job, marriage, house, kids. It made sense to us. But my path could have made sense too if you'd tried to understand it, I said quietly. You're right, he admitted, and the admission seemed to cost him. We didn't try. We saw you choosing something different and assumed it was wrong. That was our failure, not yours. Mom wiped her face with a napkin, smearing her carefully applied makeup. When you were little, you used to draw these elaborate cities. Remember, you'd spend hours creating buildings and streets and little people living their lives. You'd tell me stories about each building, what happened inside, who worked there. I remembered. I'd forgotten she remembered. I should have known then, she continued. You weren't just drawing, you were designing worlds. But I was so focused on making sure you and Emma succeeded in ways I understood that I missed who you really were. Emma shifted in her chair, her voice bitter when she spoke. So what, we're all supposed to apologize now, beg forgiveness from the secret millionaire? Emma, Todd warned, but she wasn't done. No, I want to know what the plan is here. Isla kept this massive secret for years, and now we're supposed to, pretend it's normal? Pretend she didn't lie to all of us. I never lied, I repeated firmly. Omission isn't the same as lying. Isn't it? Emma challenged. Every time you accepted Mom's grocery money, knowing you had millions, wasn't that a lie? Every time you all assumed I was a failure without asking about my life, wasn't that worse? Christopher's mother tried to interject with false cheer. Perhaps we should focus on the positive. This is wonderful news. Both Harrison girls are successful. Stop, Mom said sharply, surprising everyone. Just stop. This isn't wonderful news. This is devastating news. Not because Hila is successful, but because we missed it. We missed our daughter's entire journey because we were too arrogant to see it. She turned to me, and for the first time in years really looked at me, not as Emma's lesser sister, Not as the daughter who didn't fit the mold, but as me. "Tell me about your company," she said. "Not the money or the clients. Tell me about building it. Tell me about the first day you knew you'd made it." I hesitated, unsure if I could trust this sudden interest. But something in her face seemed genuine, so I began. "The first year was terrifying," I admitted. "I had no safety net. If I failed, I couldn't come home because you'd already told me I was making a mistake. So failure wasn't an option. I worked 18-hour days. I lived on coffee and determination. I took every project, no matter how small, and treated it like it was for the biggest company in the world." Dad leaned forward, actually engaged. "What was the breakthrough?" "A startup called Vertex. They were building an app for mental health support, but their interface was a disaster. I redesigned it completely, made it intuitive and calming. They went from 1,000 users to 1 million in 6 months. The founder told everyone it was because of the design. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who was behind it. And that led to the bigger clients." Todd asked, his business mind genuinely curious. "Eventually. But first, I had to learn to value my work properly. I was charging $500 for projects worth $50,000. A mentor told me I was devaluing not just my work, but the entire industry. So I raised my prices. Lost some clients, but gained better ones." Emma had been quiet, but now she spoke. "Why design? You studied fine art." "Design is art with purpose," I explained. "Every interface I create affects thousands, sometimes millions of people. I make technology more human. That's my art." "I don't understand any of it," Mom admitted. "But I want to. Can you teach me?" The request was so unexpected, I didn't know how to respond. This woman who dismissed my work as computer drawings was asking to understand it. "Remember when Emma was in high school and she had that economics project?" Mom continued. "I spent weeks learning about supply and demand so I could help her. I should have done the same for you. I should have learned your language instead of expecting you to only speak ours." Aunt Martha, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Can I ask something? Why keep driving that old Honda? Why not buy a nice car if you have the money?" "Because the car doesn't matter," I said. "It gets me where I need to go. The money isn't about showing off. It's about freedom, security, the ability to choose my projects based on passion, not payment." "But the condo," Christopher said, "that's showing off." "The condo is my sanctuary," I corrected. "It's where I watch the sunrise over the water and remember that I built something from nothing. Every room in that place represents a challenge. Overcome, a client won a moment when I chose to bet on myself." Emma's laugh was bitter. "Must be nice having $1 million sanctuary." "You know what was in my sanctuary before I bought it?" I asked her. "A studio apartment with a broken heater and windows that didn't close properly. I spent 3 winters wrapped in blankets working on a laptop that crashed every few hours. You were sending me photos of your perfect life while I was choosing between groceries and internet service. So yes, now I have a nice home. I earned every square foot of it." Todd shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't know things were that hard. Because you didn't ask. You assumed I was fine with struggling because I was an artist, like poverty was part of my aesthetic." Mom stood up suddenly. "Walk."